I remember the first time I heard, "You're my heart, you're my soul." It wasn't on the radio, not in a club, not even on MTV. It was playing through the broken speakers of a second-hand jukebox in a dusty diner off Route 66, where the waitress had tears in her eyes. She didn't know the words, didn't speak German, but the melody pulled something out of her, something only music that comes from heartbreak and stardom can ever reach. That's how modern talking snuck into America's veins. Not like a storm, like a soft breeze that you don't notice until it blows your entire past back into your face. But who were they really? Most Americans remember them vaguely. Two sharply dressed European guys with icy blonde hair and a voice that didn't sound like anything else on the charts. But in the 1980s, modern talking was more than a synth-pop duo. They were a symbol, a paradox. Two men who created music that sounded like love letters and breakups at the same time, in perfect harmony. But what the world saw was only the glittering surface. Behind the scenes? Fame, jealousy, obsession, betrayal, and an ending that was as sudden as their rise. This is not just a story about chart toppers. This is a story about a band that redefined Europop and then destroyed itself from the inside out. And it all started in West Germany, 1983. The spark before the flame. Before they were legends, they were nobodies. Dieter Bohlen was already working behind the scenes in the German music industry, writing songs, producing tracks for Schlager artists, and chasing the kind of fame that came with no spotlight, just credits in small fonts. He was smart, sharp, and more obsessed with control than success. For Dieter, perfection wasn't optional, it was mandatory. Then came Thomas Anders, born Bernd Weidong, a quiet, soft-spoken guy with a voice that melted even the coldest of synthesizers. He had no idea what he was stepping into when he walked into that studio. Dieter saw something in him, not just a voice, but a presence. He wasn't a star yet, but he could be, if Dieter could mold him. Their chemistry wasn't instant. It was forged, built out of friction, artistic differences, and Dieter's obsessive need to engineer the perfect pop product. What Anders lacked in ego, Dieter made up for tenfold. They were never meant to be friends. They were meant to be explosive. 1984, the first hit, and the first war. You're My Heart, You're My Soul wasn't just a debut. It was a detonation. No one saw it coming. Not in the US, not in Germany, not even in Dieter's calculated mind. The song stormed through Europe, over 8 million copies sold. Suddenly, the two men were standing on global stages, facing screaming crowds and flashing lights, as if they'd been born for it. But the spotlight is a magnifying glass, and it started to burn. Behind those iconic music videos and synchronized fashion choices was a relationship fraying at every edge. Dieter was the puppet master, and Thomas was tired of being the puppet. Still, they kept playing the part. One platinum single after another. Sherry, Sherry Lady, Brother Louie, Atlantis is Calling. Each track built on the last like a tower of glass. Beautiful, fragile. And then came the interviews, where Anders said less and less. His voice belonged to the world now, but his opinions? They were locked away, silenced by Dieter's dominant vision. To the fans, they were magic. To each other, they were slowly becoming poison. The fall before the fall. By 1987, after just 6 studio albums, all of them smashing successes, modern talking suddenly ended. No press tour, no goodbye album, just silence. Most American fans didn't even know they were gone. But insiders? They knew the truth. And it was ugly. There were rumors. Dieter blamed Nora, Thomas's wife, calling her manipulative, controlling. Thomas accused Dieter of creative suffocation. Management had to be present in the same room, just so the two men wouldn't walk out in mid-sentence. The friendship had died long before the band did. But the fans refused to forget. Their songs kept playing. In nightclubs, in teenage bedrooms, on mixtapes passed from hand to hand. Modern talking, even in silence, kept talking. And that silence would last more than a decade. They were done, gone, buried in the golden rubble of their own success. But something strange happened in the 1990s, something not even Dieter Bohlen, the architect of their rise, could have predicted. People wouldn't stop listening. In Russia, they were gods. In Asia, they were legends. In South America, their posters still hung in hair salons and college dorms. Every club with a broken light and a working sound system played "You Can Win If You Want" like it was holy scripture. Modern talking didn't just vanish. They echoed, and that echo would pull them back together. But this time, not out of friendship. This time, it was business. 1998, the resurrection. Dieter Bohlen was never nostalgic. He didn't care for the past. He cared for numbers. And the numbers told him something very clear. The world wanted modern talking again. So, he made the call. Thomas didn't pick up the first time, or the second, or the third, but he listened. He had to. He wasn't the young dreamer anymore. The solo career hadn't gone as planned. The spotlight had dimmed. But that voice, that unmistakable falsetto, still flawless. And when Dieter said the magic words, new songs, new beats, same name, Thomas agreed. Not out of love, out of logic. They were both older, colder, smarter. Modern talking returned in 1998 like a phoenix made of sequins and synthesizers. But this wasn't the 80s anymore. This was the age of techno, house, and digital radio. And they adapted with terrifying precision. Back for good? Their comeback single, You're My Heart, You're My Soul 98, smashed charts across Europe. Suddenly, teenagers who weren't even born when the original dropped were dancing to its remix in Berlin basements and Turkish weddings. The album, titled Back for Good, was a statement. Not just a name, a threat, a warning. They weren't here to play. They were here to own. The marketing was sleek. The visuals were polished. Thomas wore sunglasses more often. Dieter gave fewer interviews. Everything was calculated, every beat, every harmony. And the fans? They didn't care if it was manufactured. They just wanted to feel again. Modern talking gave them that. But behind the scenes, history was repeating itself. With sharper claws, glass castles. They smiled for the cameras. They performed like they were born to do it. But off stage, they still couldn't be in the same room for long. Thomas still resented being a singing mannequin. Dieter still micromanaged every note, every pause, every breath. This time, though, there was too much money to walk away. So they kept building the castle. Album after album, Alone, Year of the Dragon, Universe, all chart toppers in Europe and Asia. But in America, the buzz stayed underground. US fans had moved on. But deep in YouTube comments, college radio stations, and 80s nights across LA and New York, there were still whispers of that voice, that beat, that duo. They were cult classic royalty. But royalty has its curses. 2003, the final blow. It should have lasted. The formula was working. The money was flowing. The nostalgia was strong. But you can't build forever on cracks. In 2003, just 5 years after their explosive reunion, modern talking collapsed again. This time for good. Dieter pulled the plug. In interviews, he barely hid his contempt. It's not about music anymore, he said. It's about control. Thomas? He didn't fight it. He just walked away. Some say he was relieved. Others say he was broken. No farewell tour. No final album. Just another silence. But unlike last time, something was different. The world noticed. And they didn't forgive easily. Aftershock. Post-breakup, the bitterness spilled into public view. Dieter released a tell-all book, painting Thomas as weak, indecisive, manipulated. Thomas fired back with class, declining to engage in tabloid mudslinging, but the damage was done. Modern talking had officially become two separate planets. But the music? It refused to die. Young producers started sampling their beats. TikTok kids, years later, danced to Brother Louie remixes without knowing the faces behind the track. DJs in Miami spun Atlantis is calling like it was a new find. Their legacy had grown beyond them. That's the thing about music built from raw feeling. It becomes immortal, even when the people behind it can't stand each other. The legacy begins to shift. As years passed, the world changed, but the fascination with modern talking remained. Biopics were pitched. Documentaries were rumored. Fans across cultures, languages, and generations began asking the same questions. How did two men who couldn't speak to each other create music that spoke to everyone? How did they shape pop history and then vanish like ghosts? And more importantly, was it all real? The friendship? The fame? The flame? Or was modern talking just the greatest illusion ever pulled off in pop history? Imagine this. You're in a packed underground club in Tokyo. Neon lights. Smoke. Bass shaking your ribs. And then it hits. That sound. That voice. Sherry, Sherry lady. The crowd doesn't flinch. They explode. It's 2006. Modern talking has been dead for 3 years again. But their music is everywhere. Bootleg CDs in Brazilian markets. Remixes in Tel Aviv. A ringtone in Dubai. A background track in a Hollywood indie film. A remix playing in a New York barber shop. They weren't touring. They weren't recording. but somehow they were more alive than ever. This wasn't a comeback. This was something bigger. This was resurrection through myth. Postmortem stardom. Both Dieter and Thomas went their separate ways. Dieter doubled down on German television. He became a judge on Deutschland sucht den Superstar, Germany's version of American Idol. He thrived on controversy, on calling young singers hopeless, on remaining the sharp-tongued emperor of pop criticism. He was still writing music, still producing, but he wasn't trying to be loved. He wanted to be right. Thomas, on the other hand, chose a quieter path. He leaned into classical crossover albums, orchestral tours, a more refined sound. His fan base shrank, but hardened. He was no longer a pop icon. He was a balladeer, a romantic, the face of nostalgia, wrapped in tuxedos and velvet stages. They would never stand on the same stage again, but the world kept placing them side by side. The internet age, a new generation discovers the myth. By the 2010s, something unexpected happened. The children of the original fans, and even some of their grandchildren, began discovering modern talking the way Americans discover mythology, through fragments. A TikTok dance here, a slowed-down remix there, a sample on a viral YouTube beat. And suddenly, there was a question being asked on Reddit, Twitter, Discord. Who are these guys? And why does their music hit so hard? That's when documentaries started to resurface. Old interviews, scandal clips, studio footage. A YouTuber in Arizona did a breakdown of You're My Heart, You're My Soul, and racked up over 4 million views. Another in Detroit did a What Happened to Modern Talking deep dive, comparing them to Daft Punk. The comments were flooded with shock. How did I not know about these guys? Why wasn't this popular in the US back then? They were like European Michael Jacksons? The myth grew larger than the men who created it. The American disconnection. Here's the truth. Modern talking never truly cracked America during their peak. In the 1980s, the US was dominated by glam rock, early hip-hop, and stadium ballads. There was no space on radio for a German synth-pop duo singing love songs with glittering arrangements and dramatic choruses. They were too soft for the rock crowd, too Euro for the R&B scene, and too unknown for the pop purists. But that difference? That's what made them timeless. While America slept, the rest of the world memorized every lyric. And now, thanks to streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, the walls had come down. Borders vanished. Genres blurred. Suddenly, a 16-year-old in Kansas could stumble upon Jet Airliner and feel like they'd uncovered a secret buried for decades. And what happens when Americans find a secret? They run with it. The reassessment begins. By 2020, modern talking was quietly entering a cultural rebirth. Music critics who once dismissed them as too kitschy began calling them pioneers. Artists from The Weeknd to Dua Lipa referenced 80s synths. Some even cited modern talking as influence. The aesthetic of their videos, crisp suits, bold backdrops, mysterious gazes, became meme-worthy and then fashion-worthy. They were no longer the joke. They were aesthetic gods. Vinyl reissues sold out in minutes. Merch popped up on Etsy. An EDM producer sampled Geronimo's Cadillac and turned it into a club hit in Vegas. And then came the petitions. Thousands of signatures. Bring modern talking to Coachella. Reunite the kings of Europop. We don't need harmony between them. We just need one more song. But there was one problem. 2, actually. And they had names. 2 men. 1 legend. 0 peace. By this point, Dieter and Thomas weren't enemies. They were estranged icons. Every year, they got interview requests to discuss a reunion. Every year, both declined. Dieter joked in a 2019 German podcast, "We already did a comeback. Next time, it'll be from the grave." Thomas, ever the diplomat, responded in an Italian magazine, "I have nothing but love for what we created." But sometimes, stories end for a reason. And yet, they never stopped performing, just not together. Dieter brought the beats. Thomas brought the ballads. And fans? They brought the dream. Because the longer they stayed apart, the more the world imagined what it would feel like to see them side by side one more time. Not for ego, not for money, but for closure. Modern talking in the eyes of America finally seen. 2023. A 21-year-old influencer posts a modern talking tribute video on TikTok. It goes viral, not just in Europe, but in Texas, California, Florida. Millions of teens, Gen Z kids, boomers, and nostalgia junkies comment. Who are they? Why does this feel like a memory I don't have? This is better than half the stuff on the radio now. American late-night hosts make jokes. Modern talking? They sound like a perfume ad and a breakup mixed together. But the laughter is affectionate, curious. And finally, nearly 40 years after their debut, America starts to pay attention. The stage was empty, but the seats were full. They weren't playing. They hadn't played in 2 decades. And yet, on a warm summer night in Madrid, over 18,000 people showed up to a Modern Talking tribute concert. No Dieter, no Thomas, just the music. And when the first notes of Atlantis' Calling rang out, the crowd didn't just cheer. They wept. This wasn't nostalgia anymore. This was worship. 2 legends, 2 paths, 1 legacy. In the 2020s, both men continued building solo careers, parallel lines that never crossed. Dieter Bohlen remained the sharp mastermind, still judging TV talent, still producing music, still holding court on German talk shows with his signature mix of charm and cruelty. His interviews became viral moments, his quotes memed to hell and back. He was polarizing, and he loved it. In one interview, he said, "Thomas sings like an angel, but I was the devil with the plan. That's why it worked." Thomas Anders, meanwhile, embraced elegance. He toured with orchestras, performed Sinatra classics, held intimate concerts in Venice and Vienna. His fan base aged with him, loyal, tearful, and still singing every word of, "You can win if you want." He rarely mentioned Dieter. When he did, it was short. "We created something untouchable. We just couldn't hold on to it. But the world refused to let it fade." Modern Talking becomes immortal. In 2025, a Netflix documentary titled Talking in Stereo dropped. Narrated by a famous American actor, it told the story, raw and unfiltered, of the duo who captured hearts and then broke their own. It went viral, not just in Europe, in America. The documentary hit #1 in US streaming for a week. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Modern Talking. Saturday Night Live joked about their breakup. Rolling Stone wrote a cover story calling them the greatest Europop act America never knew it loved. Billboard created a special feature, Modern Talking's 10 tracks that predicted pop's future. Kids were buying t-shirts. Moms were reliving high school. Dads were digging up cassette tapes. And YouTube exploded. Fan tributes, lyric videos, vocal breakdowns. Reaction channels filmed first listens to Brother Louie. Teens cried. Grown men nodded in silence. Even AI-generated covers of Modern Talking by American artists like Drake and Billie Eilish started circulating. What was happening? Simple. They had become timeless. The final meeting that never happened. In early 2026, a major European label tried the unthinkable, a real reunion. They offered millions. A new record. A 10-city world tour. Live TV interviews. The documentary had reignited hope. America was finally listening. They just needed the real thing. Dieter said yes, with one condition. "I run the show." Thomas declined. He didn't say no for the money. He said no for peace. "I spent half my life singing what Dieter wrote. The second half? I'm finally singing for me." And that was it. No scandal. No feud. No shouting. Just closure. The meeting never happened. But the music never stopped. Modern Talking today. By 2027, their total record sales had surpassed 200 million. Their catalog had been remastered for Dolby Atmos. Their albums were taught in European music history classes. Gen Z influencers were getting Modern Talking tattoos, ironically at first, then unironically. A VR concert recreated their 1986 Athens performance. It sold 300,000 tickets in 48 hours. Thomas Anders wrote a memoir. More than a voice. It hit bestseller lists in 6 countries. Dieter Bohlen released another album under the alias Silent Composer. No vocals, just beats. But every track was unmistakably his. What made them matter? Let's be honest. They didn't change the world politically. They didn't write protest anthems. They didn't play guitar solos or smash hotel rooms. But they gave people something more human. They gave melody to heartbreak. They gave rhythm to nostalgia. They gave hope to hopeless romantics. They made music for the girl crying in the kitchen after a breakup. For the boy slow dancing in a gymnasium light. For the parents reliving their wedding song. For the club kids chasing something they couldn't name. They didn't need to be American to matter in America. They just needed to be real. The last echo. No one knows if they'll ever speak again. But in the comments of every video, on every tribute post, one phrase keeps showing up, again and again. Modern Talking saved me. And they don't even know it. Maybe that's the real legacy. Not the gold records. Not the sold-out tours. Not even the comebacks. But the fact that 2 men, from two towns with two hearts. Could make millions feel like their soul had a soundtrack. And that soundtrack? It was always the same voice.